Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to welcome everyone to this evening's event. I've worked with David Davidian for years back in Armenia and look very much forward to today's conversation on truth in media. I'd like to say that this is a very important topic, not just because of the times in which we live, and many people relying on social media and other types of platforms for their daily news, and being subject to distortions and false statements and false videos. And we need to develop the proper level of information literacy and critical thinking in order to be able to assess these various sources and determine in a thoughtful, reasoned way how accurate these are and how much we should put our faith in these various media. So I'd like to thank David Davidian for his time this evening, and I hope this topic brings a tremendous amount of critical thought and questions after the conclusion of his presentation. So now I'd like to turn it over to David. Thank you very much for joining us, and I'm looking forward to tonight's topic. Thank you.
And it's nice to see you, Randall, after all these years. You look the same, you sound the same, which is a good thing. I want to thank everyone for inviting me, the American University of Kurdistan. This is this is quite an honor for me. So how should we proceed here? Did the presentation, do I bring my presentation up and share the screen?
Yes, your presentation is here, Mr. David.
Oh, there we go. Can I? Or will you be moving the slide? Will I be moving the slide? You'll be moving.
Do you want to share your screen?
Okay, you can move the slides. So that's fine if that's easier.
Sure.
Okay, so who am I? I was born in the United States. I moved to Armenia with my family in 2014. I happen to have an extensive background in computer system architecture. And I'll show you why I don't dismiss that, but I've been teaching since about 2015. I teach computer organization, but my #1 course is the scientific method in critical thinking. So what qualifies me to discuss this topic? Well, very early on, when the internet actually started, I spent quite a bit of time addressing historical revisionism and historical events, and found out that you actually have to know what you're talking about. And it took years to generate the correct background knowledge to address really anything. Basically, if you don't know what you're talking about, you shouldn't really say anything, which we'll get into that in a second. So eventually, in two of my the last jobs that I was at Sun Microsystems and IBM, I ended up in what they call technical intelligence analysis. So what does that mean? What that means is when someone in the competition makes a claim, I have to track that down, see if the claim is, well, does the claim actually, is it true? It usually isn't, and it usually defies the laws of physics or electronics or something like this. And eventually, when I was at Sun Microsystems, I had to know everything about IBM's advanced technology. And what's interesting is when Sun Microsystems closed up, IBM hired me right away, and I became the expert on Sun Microsystems. So on Sun Microsystems products. So I guess I can say I learned the hard way. I wasn't really trained specifically on critical thinking or like. However, I learned it the hard way, and I'm happy that I can share that with you. Here. So if you move to the next slide, okay. What happened to news and information? There was a time before the internet, in fact, a long time ago, where news was important. News was important to the point where sometimes people would pass news on from word of mouth just by talking. And why this was important, and actually what's interesting is, you may have noticed over the years, news was considered something on the negative side. When you would listen to news, let's say, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, sorry, 30, 40 years ago, perhaps, what you really heard is the bad stuff. And the reason is you had to know the bad stuff in order to accommodate what was going on. If you knew the good stuff, that's okay. So if you knew that, well, there's going to be a street closing, or there's going to be the power is going to be out, or there's no water, or there may be a war, or something like this, those things are important, and they were sort of considered negative. Well, that was before the internet. When the internet came along, the definition of news and information really changed, to the point where you probably don't realize this, but when you click on a link, if that link takes more than 7 seconds to appear on your screen, you'll either try to click on it, or you just move on to something else. You probably don't realize that. That's the 7-second rule. In the old days, you would listen to someone for an hour to figure out what was going on. What we really need now is critical thinking. And I'll get into what that is to a certain extent. We all should be critical thinkers. Critical thinking doesn't mean you think hard. But you see, we are all susceptible to what's called confirmation bias. We like to hear things that we believe, and we reject those items that don't conform to the way we believe. That's not very good. In fact, some of you have probably noticed when United States President Trump doesn't like what he hears from someone, he usually fires the person. That's not very good. If you were a general, and you wanted to know, I don't know, how many tanks there were behind some mountain, well, you want to get the exact information. You don't want an approximation unless that's all you could get. But you would want to listen. You would want to know everything. You would want to know everything about what is going on the other side of the mountain, so you could either prepare, or there's an attack that has to happen, or you could move and do something else. Let me give an example of disinformation within the general topic of propaganda. Let me read this. This is important. Russian military technology proves ineffectual. July 30th, 2026, sort of looking ahead. The Institute of Real News, that's a news company. Over the past few days, Russian advanced military technology has exposed its limitations. Again, as Ukrainian forces destroyed several Russian T-14 tanks, claimed to be the fourth generation as Russian forces entered the city of Odessa. This is further indication of the lack of Russian military technology resulting from the crumbling of the Russian economy after its invasion of Ukraine. This is not very good. It's an example of disinformation and propaganda. Now, for those of you who know where Odessa is, and most of you probably do, well, first of all, we have Russians already in Odessa. So they must have done something right. Look at the title. Russian military technology proves ineffectual. That's interesting because they're already in Odessa. That means something must have been right. And all we hear is that, well, Ukrainian forces destroyed several Russian T-14 tanks. How about if the Russians destroyed most of Odessa? You see, what's happening here is you're only hearing part of the story. And to understand what's going on here, you would have to have background information, which means you're going to have to not believe everything you hear. Of course, you should be skeptical. People in this part of the world are very skeptical anyway, but we should not be skeptics, but we should be skeptical. Not that you don't believe anything you see, but if you see something like this, and something like this is a short article that we would see in the news easily. So there's a lot that's wrong here. And this is just an example. And we're being pounded by things like this. Now, this is very interesting. The Nazi propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, whether he invented this or not is something else, but he says, if you tell a big lie, if you tell a big enough lie and keep repeating it, people eventually start to believe it. Well, I mean, this is psychological. After a while, if you keep on hearing the same thing and you don't hear people contradicting it and saying this is ridiculous, after a while, you just stop thinking and you just accept things. There's an illusion of truth here. Our brains often mistake familiarity with truth. Just because we hear something all the time doesn't mean it's true. We just hear it all the time. And it goes into our brains and goes to our neurons in our brains, and it just reinforces, the repetition reinforces what's being said. Whether or not it's true is something different. Well, when it comes from authority, it comes from there's a perception that people in authority, there's cognitive fluency. When something feels smooth and familiar, we're less likely to question it. Yes, I see that. When someone in authority says something, you realize just because someone has a stethoscope, the thing that listens to your heart, and they have a white shirt on, and they call themselves a doctor, it doesn't mean that they're infallible. It doesn't mean that they can't make mistakes. They can. And when you go to the doctor, sometimes when you ask too many questions, they get very nervous. They shouldn't get nervous. They should explain things. Many times, usually in this part of the world, if you go to the doctor and they say, "Oh, this is what you have. Just do this," and you think in your body and you say, "Geez, my grandmother wouldn't do that, and my grandmother lived till 95 years old," and you wonder what's going on. Anyway, but just keep that thought. Then, of course, there's a bandwagon effect. If everyone listens to the same thing all the time, and a lot of people listen to this, a lot of people say, well, geez, everyone's wearing a mask during the COVID time. Well, maybe that's the thing to do. Well, maybe someone should have asked the question. So what happened to the truth? Okay, forces are after your minds and your pocketbook. Now, they've always been after your minds and particularly your pocketbook. And it's getting more and more difficult to understand what's happening in the background to us. The technological advances, they pervade the perception that anyone can almost look credible. I mean, how many videos have we seen that look very real? I mean, some of them are funny, but other ones, sometimes you can't tell whether they're real or not. And of course, this is since AI came out. If there's real news, there is also real propaganda. There's gossip, there's satire. People play games with words. There are unverifiable reports, just like the one about Ukraine. We don't know what happened. We just read a report. It's just a little picture that we see of the yes, those Russian tanks did go to those Russian tanks did enter Odessa, but maybe there was 1,000 tanks. We don't know. They didn't say that. And we can't make the assumption that, well, geez, this is really bad for Russia, since they're already on the other side of Ukraine on the Black Sea. You can find the truth, but it increasingly takes a huge effort. Now, what you really should do is you should suspend judgment. And that's really difficult for young people. I used to be young, and I used to think I knew. I used to think I know everything. Actually, yeah, I think you're a teenager, you think you know everything. 20, 25, even 30 years old, you think you know everything. As you get older, you realize that you actually never did. There are some things that you have to stop and think about. You don't have to give an answer to something. Someone says to you, "Oh, what's happening over here?" "Oh, I know what's happening over there." Man. You just say something. Well, you should probably ask that person, "Well, where did you get that information from?" Now, you can't do this with everything. You really can't do this with everything. You probably won't have too many more friends left. Your family won't like you. Your brothers and sisters won't like you if you constantly ask questions. But there are some things that are very important, very, very important, that are around us, and we should just assume. In fact, I think some of us know that. I mean, there was a theory. There was a theory that you could control weather or certain types of weather if radar was strong enough. Well, there was no way to actually prove that unless you were actually part of that program. Well, now that most of the radars that were involved in this have been taken out by Iran in this recent war, we find out that, well, there's a lot of rain in Iran now. There's also a lot of rain where I am, and I'm just north of Iran. There's a lot of rain in southern Turkey. There's a lot of rain in Azerbaijan. In fact, there's flooding in Azerbaijan. Well, that's interesting. Now, 15 years ago, when I first heard about this, I was extremely skeptical. Controlling the weather. How would you prove this? Well, I wouldn't pass judgment on it. I would wait until there's enough information so you can pass judgment. And this is what we have to do in the era that we're living in now. We have to slow down a little bit. And can we control the weather? Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, some of the weather could be controlled. In fact, I just downloaded the paper. That was, anyway, yes. So, is this information or news? False information is spread quickly through technology. We have misinformation. Now, misinformation is not the same as disinformation. Misinformation Misinformation is something. It's like you misunderstood someone. It may not be done on purpose. It could be done on purpose, but incorrect reporting that misleads. Disinformation is what we're surrounded by more and more, and that's false reporting that is spread on purpose. To disinformation misinforms you. Misinformation maybe is just someone made an error. We find this in financial web pages, social media, political, obviously. In the political arena, it misleads people and encourages them to adopt certain ideas or certain behaviors. For example, I'll give you one example right away. In fact, when I think when I was putting this presentation together, April 23rd, 2026, Trump or someone who uses Trump name on Truth Social claimed that the Armenian Prime Minister will allow U.S. planes to use Armenian air bases for actions against Iran. I found this incredible. No matter what you might think of the Armenian government, this was almost outrageous. The first thing I did was, before I even sent this out to even my closest friends, 2 hours after this was put out, the Armenian media said this was absolutely fake. And after it was fake, it wasn't on Trump's Truth Social anymore. So the question came up: misinformation versus disinformation. Disinformation is false reporting on purpose. Misinformation, it's usually incorrect reporting that will actually mislead and that could be corrected. Disinformation usually is never corrected. It goes out there and it takes a life of its own. For example, what happened on April 23rd, that was disinformation. No one could make an error like that. That was disinformation. For example, what is responsible for global warming? Well, we actually only hear part of the reasons, but we tend to believe everything. Carbon this, carbon that. You certainly can't make money if much of it is caused by the sun. I just want you to think about that for a second. Official explanations for the 9/11 World Trade Tower, when the planes went into the buildings in New York, the official explanations actually contradict chemistry and physics. But, well, I guess it's over, and you really can't do much about it now. What's the global response to COVID-19 in the public health interest? I don't believe it was, but I don't want to make that an issue here. But the COVID-19, the COVID era, we all were subject to a narrative that we just accepted. Now that was a really difficult one to try to crack through or find out what was going on. Again, as I say, luckily I'm part of, in this part of the world where there's more skepticism than usual. But you can't turn into a skeptic. It takes a lot of effort sometimes to undercover what's really going on. So you actually have to make the choice. Do you spend time researching something before you make a judgment? For example, I bet most of the people on this call, the students on this call, I'm sure they sat down and thought critically about whether they should go to the American University of Kurdistan or some other university, unless of course your father said you must go to it, and he has veto power. He has veto power. So I'm sure you thought about this. How does fake news? Oh, fake news creates generated material that invokes strong emotion. And when there's strong emotion involved, we tend to look at it because it's emotion. It evokes emotion. We tend to share it without checking the facts. And that happens also, it happens left and right on social media. There's all sorts of ridiculous things on social media. Actually, most of it is probably ridiculous. But the thing is, you read something and you go, "Oh, I don't believe this. Let me send it, send it to my friends." And then within an hour, 20,000 people have it and it's gone viral because it invoked a strong emotion. It's really difficult to hold back and just wait. It's okay to wait. It's actually okay to say to your closest friends when they ask you a question about something, I really don't know. Let me get back to you on that. That rarely happens because you always want to give an answer and sort of get it over with. But maybe that's not the best way. You might read something that says the stock market is going to rise tomorrow. The first thing you should do is go on the internet and say, why will the stock market fall tomorrow? And it might be interesting, just like the April 23rd thing about Pashinyan and Trump. There's no way that would happen. No matter what you think of it, it just probably would not happen. The first thing I did was to go find whether it was true or not before I sent it out to anyone. And then, of course, I sent out what Trump supposedly posted and the denial by the Armenian government. And it's gone. That's old news. It's old news. Next slide. Social media's role. Well, I think most of us know, if you've ever done a Google search, it's based on showing what is popular, not what is true. It's just what's popular. As a matter of fact, an internet search is the best way to encourage confirmation bias. I think I mentioned that earlier. Confirmation bias is when you only want to know or want to concern yourself with things that you believe. If you worked for like an intelligence organization or an analyst for some country or whatever, you would have to read everything that there is, even the information coming from your enemy that you might hate. You just have to do that. You have to know what's going on. You just can't listen to information that you like. I mean, it's nice to listen to information that you like, but if that's all you listen to, you may go down a road that it's an imaginary road. It might make you feel good, which is another reason why as soon as you find something that you like on social media, social media, you say, I don't want to hear this. This comes from this person. I don't want to hear it. Well, you really should know what's going on. And even worse than this, AI, artificial intelligence, is trained on the biases that are in the internet. I have written when ChatGPT first came out, I've written quite a few articles, political articles and the like. I would put a small paragraph into ChatGPT and I would ask it, hey, check this for grammar or whatever. I did it quickly. What it came back was I saw it taking out complete sentences. They were taking sentences out. If you have a grammar tracker would never take out, it would fix the grammar. it wouldn't delete complete sentences. ChatGPT did. When I had Russia and Ukraine in the same sentence, that sentence was eliminated. In fact, I told many teachers at the American University of Armenia about this, and they would say, "No, I said, try it yourself." So that's what AI, because AI is trained on the internet, and the internet is full of biases. Well, and even worse, sometimes it's difficult to understand where information is coming from. Where is it coming from? Where are these reports coming from? You shouldn't believe the first thing you hear and probably the last thing you hear without slowing up, taking some time to figure out where it's coming from and why it is. Now, you could just completely dismiss the whole topic and just, move on with things. You could do that. But there are important items, and I gave an example of, you wanting to come to the American University of Kurdistan or, some other place. I'm sure you thought about that heavily, and I'm sure there was critical thinking involved in that, right? The role of critical thinking in self-preservation. Critical thinking for your mind is like learning martial arts for your body. It protects you. It also allows you to evaluate your thoughts publicly and have someone actually listen to you because you're actually making sense. Critical thinking is the ability to carefully analyze information, evaluate evidence, and make reasoned logical judgments rather than accepting things at face value. Self-deception really comes from confirmation bias. We ignore or we avoid things that we don't want to hear, or they're contradictory. A military general has to have all the information, so the best move can be made. It's like you have a chessboard, and you don't really care what's going on the right side of the chessboard because you like the left side of the chessboard. Chances of you losing are really high. There are 5 generally accepted types of self-deception. Biased information seeking. You go on the internet, you go on Google, and you say, tell me what happened in this place when this XYZ happened. And you're going to get exactly what you asked for. Maybe what you asked for really isn't accurate. Then, if you do get all the information, you may be biased when you choose what you want to listen to. And of course, some of us, there's a term called we misremember. Well, you just don't like to hear certain things, so you don't want to remember them. And then we rationalize in convincing ourselves that a lie is true. If you hear something, enough, whether it's a lie or not, may not make any difference, because after a while you'll say, okay, fine, everyone believes it, so that's what we do. Remember, repetitive information, whether fact or not, it increases its credibility. It just because it's repetitive, whether it's true or not, does not increase its credibility. Just because you hear it a lot, it doesn't increase it. But I mean, try to put yourself in the situation where I'm describing. And it's okay. We're all in a situation. I do think I'm a reasonable critical thinker, and every day I try to get better and better at this because it's very difficult. Because we all have biases. Some of our biases are cultural. Some of them are probably genetic. The biases that we have. Next slide. Critical thinking is difficult. Again, you have to decide when it's appropriate enough. When you're talking with your friends, you can't challenge them constantly. There's some things that are worth challenging, some things that aren't worth challenging. You know, you want to keep your friends, you want to keep, you know, your family members and the like. So when things, you'll know when things are important enough. Research suggests that people are uncritical about their own abilities in critical thinking. A lot of people think they're really good critical thinkers, but they really aren't. At one time, I thought, again, as I said, I thought I knew everything. Well, I didn't. But that takes a while to figure out. One cannot, now, here's something that's extremely important. One cannot be a critical thinker without the ability to admit that you were wrong. This is really important. If you have the ability to accept the fact that you may have been wrong, and I don't mean that you send out emails to all your friends or messages to all your friends, I was wrong, I was wrong, I was wrong. It's not that. You may have had some subject you like, a topic, and you made some conclusions, and then you're shown you see contradictory information, a lot of it. And you say, oh, geez, you know, maybe I was wrong. It's okay to say you were wrong. The reason it's okay to say you were wrong is because now chances are you may be right, or at least closer to being right. You have to check your emotions first and check your sources before sharing something. The worst thing you want to do is, in fact, I got many emails, not many, let's say 7 or 8 emails from people I knew about the Pashinyan Trump tweet, or whatever you want to call that claim. And I said, hold on, hold on. I'm trying to, I can't say whether this is true or not. However, I said the chances of it being true are very low, considering that there's a Russian base in Armenia and there are Russian aircraft in Armenia. The chance of those same air bases being used by the United States is probably very low. Luckily, I was right. But you have to recognize your biases. We all have all sorts of biases in us. And, well, it's not just recognizing, recognizing your biases is the first thing to do. After that, what you have to do is say, oh, gee, I used to think that, wait a second, stop, wait. I used to believe this for this reason. That's most likely, and there are hundreds of biases. You'd be surprised, hundreds of biases. In fact, you can go on Wikipedia, which actually in this case is okay to go on Wikipedia, and you can see hundreds of different biases. And you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised how many of those biases we have. Again, some of them are taught, some of them may come culturally, in other ways. You have to distinguish opinion from facts and conclusions that are not based, are conclusions based on invalid assumptions. You read an article, the first 2 sentences may be an assumption. At the end of the article, or even the paragraph, you'll find the end of the paragraph makes a conclusion based on assumptions. That would mean that those conclusions are also assumptions as well. Actually, they're worse because you're making conclusions on what's an assumption. Your assumption may not even be accurate. Now, I strongly suggest when you see statistics, examine anything that uses statistics to make conclusions, especially if they're based on surveys. There's an old expression that I say, lies, big lies, in statistics. I think that was Mark Twain, or at least Mark Twain is quoted as saying that. So there's facts, so there's lies, there's big lies, and then there's statistics, because sometimes you're unable to determine how what you see has been concluded based on statistics. Sometimes these statistics are just wrong. I have seen, for example, there was a, this was so blatant. the latest assassination on that was on Trump just a few days ago. They said, "Oh, look at how many people in Israel looked up this guy's name before the shooting happened." I looked at the chart, and they were all after the shooting happened. But that's not what the article said. I mean, what is this supposed to mean? This is what we're subject to. You have to look at what is there. Even when they show you statistics, the writer or whoever wants to disseminate disinformation, and this is definitely disinformation, you actually look at it and you can see the days and you say, wait a second, the shooting happened here, and this is why people are looking his name up, not before, but the article said, look how many people look at it before. They don't even expect that you would even look at the chart. Consider it acceptable to admit that you don't know something. It is okay for you to say to your friends, geez, I don't know. I really haven't thought about that. You don't have to give them an answer. You can just hold on a little bit. And you can say something like, let me just look into that and get back to you, either later on today or tomorrow. It's okay to do that. After a while, you'll be able to start to distinguish between what is real and what is fake. Just like I know some of you on this webinar are really good at identifying AI generated text. Some of you are good at it. I know you are, because you looked at it long enough and you figured out the patterns you see. That wouldn't happen overnight. That took some time to generate. So the elements of critical thinking. Background knowledge is the most important thing. Basically, if you don't know what you're talking about, just don't say anything. It's okay. It's okay if you don't say anything. Also, if you don't have enough background knowledge, you won't be able to understand the basis for what you are reading or listening to. Also, if you want to speak with someone, if you're speaking with someone and they say, well, where did you hear that? Where's that reference from? And you can tell them. That's having background knowledge in both directions. Attitude and values. This is also extremely important. You read an article and it's written by, I don't know, a representative of some culture or ethnic group. You can dismiss that as saying, that's how those people are. No, stop. Why are those people writing like this? It's the attitude and values. Your attitude when you reply to someone is just as important as when you're listening to someone else. The attitude and values are very important. Of course, rhetoric and the use of language, logic and argumentation, but those are at the bottom. Logic and argumentation are at the bottom. If I say to you, I don't know, all bears speak Russian. I have a bear, thus it must speak Russian. Well, it's logical, but the basic assumption is false. So if you didn't know that bears don't speak because you don't have enough background, I mean, this is very simplistic, because you don't have enough background knowledge, you could be fooled. And if you don't have logic, you can't put together an argument. Or you don't understand the logic that someone is using when they're trying to put together an argument. Next slide. Critical thinking rewards you with personal protection. It's like learning martial arts for your brain and your pocketbook, because people either want your money or how you think. Actually, this has been happening for thousands of years, but it's getting pretty sophisticated in the 21st century. It's general empowerment. It empowers you. You listen to someone and you say to yourself, that doesn't make sense. No, it doesn't make sense, but in fact, that defies the laws of physics. and you say to yourself, okay, fine, thank you very much, and you move on. Civic duty. This was a bit tough, especially in all parts of the world now, but in our part of the world that we're in right now. How do you know what's going on in your own country? It's because someone told you what's going on in the country. Sometimes even when you see things with your own eyes, you really can't tell what's going on. But it's very difficult to, if you believe that the democratic process is a proper form of government, how do you know what is reasonable to vote for, or what person is reasonable to vote for? How would you know? Just because they look nice or what they say? Well, I think we know that once people get elected, so you shouldn't just listen to the first thing the person says. You say, wait a second, no. I was around 5 years ago when that happened. No, that person isn't saying what I know. In fact, I was in the street when that happened. I saw it with my own eyes. And of course, truth and wisdom. Truth with the capital T. After a while, you value the importance of truth. And once you have truth, then you have wisdom, and then you get old because it takes a long time. It takes a long time to, even with critical thinking, to gather truth and wisdom. That's why there are very few, if any, 20-year-old diplomats that are very successful. If you notice, diplomats are they're advanced in their age because they've seen enough, and they could put enough together where they realize, no, wait a second, no. I read the history of World War II. I know what happened in Vietnam. I know what happened between Iran and Iraq. I know what happened with Saddam Hussein. I know what's going on in Iraq. After a while, because you were able to ascertain the truth, you end up with wisdom. Say, hold it, wait a second. Is that really what happened? Can you explain that to me? And if you do know, if you have most of the truth, it'd be great to have all the truth, whatever. After a while, you'll get to the point where you can look at an article, you can listen to someone and say, okay, I'll listen to you. Very good. Thank you very much. And you move on. You could accept it or you don't accept it. But what you don't want to have is an accepted narrative that everyone believes become what you accept without thinking about it first. This is what critical thinking gives you. Surviving the 21st century. Yeah, there's forces all over the place, local, regional, and global. They all want our brains, our pocketbooks, our bodies. They want our votes. They want more people to support them. And this has been happening for thousands of years, except we're just seeing the modern manifestation of it. It's up to you. It's up to you to make the decisions and evaluate the forces that are being used to influence you. Don't simply dismiss anything. Look, this is very difficult. This is really difficult, which is why it's very easy to be caught up in the bandwagon. What everyone is thinking, you go along with everyone is thinking. Slow down and try to evaluate what's going on around you. We're all susceptible to aspects of what's called cognitive warfare, where our own biases and insecurities and ignorance. I don't mean ignorance as in like you're dumb. It's ignorance as you just don't know. For example, I was very curious why during the whole COVID era, why there were no public service announcements that said, make sure you take enough vitamin D and zinc. Why is that? Because vitamin D and zinc support your immune system big time, especially in the wintertime, especially when you don't get enough sun. You say, why was that? And I still wonder. Well, I have my own thoughts, but I'll keep those to myself right now. So, if any of you want to contact me, I'm on Facebook. I have my own website. I've written about 100 articles actually over the past maybe 10 years. It's called Shadow Diplomat. I'm on LinkedIn, and you can email me with any questions you have on this stuff. Out of everything I think that I've ever shared with my students, friends, and people, it's having people slow down and critically evaluate what's going on around them. Do not jump to conclusions on anything. Look, when you guys go to the local bazaar or something to buy something, you don't listen to what the first person says. Of course not. You look around. Well, there's no difference between something very simple and something very complex. Something very complex takes more time. But you have to protect yourself. The best way to protect yourself against disinformation, which is done on purpose, misinformation, is you may not even know whether it's true or not. It may be an accident. And all the forces that are around to make you think a certain way based on your biases. And that's the worst thing of all. Based on when biases are used against you, it's called cognitive warfare. You could scare a whole bunch of, for example, let me give you just one small example. When, at least in the 1960s, 70s, I think even till now, in eastern Turkey today, where all the Armenians were killed in the genocide, when there were earthquakes, the local people you could hear the news reports. They're saying, oh, the Armenians are coming out of the ground, because a lot of them were buried alive, or they were thrown in water, whatever. Where did that come from? What do you mean people are coming out of the ground? I could not possibly make this up. I've seen reports like this. So there are things that you hear and you say, wait a second, slow down a bit. Well, everyone is saying that these earthquakes are Armenians coming back out of the ground. What's that supposed to mean? That's almost as silly as many of the other things we hear. So I really want to thank everyone for listening. I noticed that I don't think anyone left the meeting. I see 1 out of 4 here. There's 4 sets of people. That's pretty good. That hopefully that means that I made an impression. And believe me, this is an honor to give this talk to the American University of Kurdistan. And I want to thank my Kurdish brothers and sisters that are listening, for taking the time at night to listen to something that.
David, you really did, and that was very good. Thank you so much, and thank you for answering all the questions in the chats. There's one question that took my attention that was not being answered. Maybe you did not see that, and to be honest, it's an attractive questions for me too. It says, should social media platforms have the power to control uh, the or remove the false informations, or that would threaten the freedom of speech?
No, social media should not control information. They shouldn't. People should not be afraid of freedom of speech. Freedom of speech has been around, at least in the West, for a long time. And it's only been recently where I guess certain people in power want to filter information. They want to filter information. You shouldn't have to filter information. The reason is no one should be afraid of the truth. Really, I mean, no one should be afraid of the truth. And there was a question came up here, where can we search for information? It's really tough. It's really, really tough because what's happening is it's one thing if, for example, there's a bunch of people are sick and you find out what to do or whatever, you talk to doctors or whatever. It's something else where a government, I'm just giving this as an example, a government could say, oh no, there's something wrong with the water, you have to buy water from us. And you say to yourself, what's wrong with the water? It was fine yesterday. Why is the water going to be bad tomorrow? That's going to be tough. You're going to have to have some way to test the water, have old water and new water, and see if there's any difference. The chances of water going bad overnight is really bad. Is really rare. You don't have water that just goes bad overnight. Where are you going to find this information? It's tough. It's really tough. It's getting tougher and tougher to find this information. A long time ago, you say, well, I bought this car. It isn't running well. Oh, well, the guy down the street has a car like that. And he goes, oh, yeah, these cars are this way. Just do this. That's fine. Now it's got to the point where things are so technically, they're presented in such a way, you don't even know what's real and what's imaginary. It's tough, especially if you haven't been living long enough. If you haven't been living long enough to know what it used to be like when you could actually figure out something.
And you've mentioned that sometimes we send each other like a video or a post that contains a false informations, and that post will goes viral. My question is, why do people believe lies more than truth?
Look, because we're human beings and we have biases and we have thought patterns that we were born with or we were taught. We were taught that you can't say this. I can't believe they're saying this. And you send that to your friends. Then you go back and you say, wait a second, I think I know why that person said that. It's too late because now they're going to send it to their friends and their friends and their friends. It wasn't that way a long time ago where you press a button and it goes to 2,000 people. You'll say it to your friend, you'll call your friend up on the phone in the old days and say, you know what I heard? Can you believe this? And the person will say, nah, I don't think so. But when you're by yourself, you say, this is ridiculous. And you press one button, goes to 2,000 people and then 200,000 people. That's one way where this kind of information is spread, which is why you have to slow down and look at your emotions first.
Thank you so much. Since Ms. Lucine is here, the director of CAPA, I want to take the advantage of this and ask her a question from her experience. As we know, you have been in many countries, Ms. Lucine. If you can unmute yourself, please. You have been in many countries. In your view, like, do you think that false news affect every society differently, or it is the same?
I believe that false news affects every society in a similar way. It all depends on education and what has David been telling through this whole hour that we spent with him, that we have our own biases. Of course, some cultures could have more or less or different biases, but nevertheless, if someone is educated and also has the ability to differentiate being truthful rather than being deceiving, because you can be educated, but you can still decide to be deceiving, and that's even more dangerous. And I have seen that. But nevertheless, if someone is educated and has good values, then they will not go after false information. But someone, if they are educated but they don't have good values, then they will take that information, make it even more false, and manipulate people, and then dump it in, especially nowadays in social media. But in general, what I've seen in all the cultures that I've lived, people are the same. They want the same thing. They want to be loved. They want to be told the truth. And some just are merely greedy, and it's the greed that drives false news, and the greed that brings all this calamity in our lives. That's my perspective. Mhm.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for attending. Uh, I think there's only one question left, Mr. David. Should there be a law punishment for those who spread misinformation?
Okay, there's one thing to spread misinformation. There's one thing to spread disinformation. Misinformation could just be the person just wrote the sentence wrong. That could be, but the trouble is you still don't know whether that's right or not. You might believe it. Disinformation is done on purpose. It's to completely manipulate you, based on your biases, your emotions, or things that are associated with like a cultural background that you will either magnify or something like this. I don't think that people should be, well, okay, at least in the United States, a long time ago, there was something that was called there was a law against false advertising. At least there was that. And false advertising, it says, you buy something and there's really bad stuff in it, but they never talk about the bad stuff, and you buy it. Or you buy something and it's, or this is made in Japan, or this is made with a certain kind of steel or whatever, and it wasn't. Well, you can't go around saying that because that's blatant lies. Is that disinformation? No, that's just lying. And so, at least in the United States and probably places in Europe, Europe probably still has things. In the U.S., look, lawyers are really good in the United States. So, sometimes it's difficult to, bring a case of false advertising. But should there be a ministry of truth? No. I don't think there should be a ministry of truth or a ministry of information or a ministry of propaganda. I don't believe so, because ultimately, the truth will come out. Sometimes it's too late, but it'll come out. Who's going to decide? Who's going to decide what is truth and what isn't? This is really bad. This is really bad. If you think, for example, um, uh, uh, people will say, you shouldn't scream fire in the old movie theaters when people used to go to a movie. You shouldn't yell fire because people could die, even if there wasn't a fire. That's not freedom of speech, because you have to have responsibility. If you want to, say something, you should be responsible for what you say. If someone in a news corporation makes a claim in an article, you should be able to immediately go to that person and say, where did this information come from? I was there. What you wrote is not true, and they should retract it. I don't think they should have laws, because once the first law starts, it's just going to compound itself and get worse and worse and worse. I don't think there should be.
Thank you so much, Mr. David. That was clear. Dr. Rhodes, if you're still here, the last questions I want to ask you. Yeah. Dr. Roots, since you live in Kurdistan, as an American that lives in Kurdistan and in nowadays situations, do you think sometimes translating the news are the reason that our people are having misinformations or false news? Like for example, like Trump is giving a speech in English, then you hear something different from Kurdish people here about the war.
I will agree with Lucini. I don't think anything is different in Kurdistan and amongst the Kurdish population than any other country. So I don't think there are any peculiarities here. As long as people have access to many different television stations and networks and platforms, they actually have the same array of information as people in other countries. So I don't think there's any disadvantage living here. It's just as was discussed this evening, that people need to develop their own critical thinking skills and slow down as they consume information and interpret it. But I don't see anything different in this landscape. I think it's the exact same issue. Even in the United States, people still hear Trump's words differently and react differently because of the confirmation bias and because of the various outlets they gravitate towards, simply because they want that confirmation of their preconceived ideas. So I don't see anything peculiar here. And I think that as I said, the array of news outlets and platforms here is the same as in other countries. As Lucine said, there has to be a good amount of education, that people are able to develop these skills. And that begins in K through 12, as well as in university. That the development of those critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity skills must start very early, or else when people become adults, they will not have the tools to decide for themselves and engage with news information on a critical level.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. David. That was very good. Thank you, Dr. Rods. Thank you, Lucinia. Uh, at the end, I want to announce to all the participants that next Tuesday also we will be having a webinar, same time, 7 p.m. Our webinar will be about love and work, designing a career that energizes you. And stay tuned for the next webinar. You can get more information on our social media pages on Instagram especially. You will get the link to join the next webinar. گەلێک سپۆس بۆ ئامادەبوونەوە هەمیان متفێت بژمە وێبنەرت مەدت بەردەوام بن ئەت سێشەم بیا بهێچیدا هەمان دەمیدال دەمژمێر هەفتی مەغرب دەما وێبنەرەك هەبتن وێبنەرەمەیە بهێتن دێل سەر کاری بتن و حەژێکردنەوە بوو کاری دیزاینکردنا کارێکی کوتو وەسە حەژێ بکەی هێزێ بدەتەتە دیسان جی متوێت بژمەنگۆ ئەگەر هزرێک سەریوەدا هەبتن بابەتێک بۆ وێبنەرن بهێتن هینچین سەر پۆستێمێ پۆستێ پیچێ کاپا دوماهیک پۆست یە سەر وێبنەری کۆمنت بکەن هزرێت خوبتەنەمە ئینشاءالله ئەو هزرێت داهاتیدا دێبنە وێبنەر و دەهین باشتر مفای ژێبینن. Thank you so much all. You have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.